everybody. Before we jump into today's episode, we have two sponsors we want to say thank you to for supporting this show. The first one is Routine. You guys have heard me talk about Routine, honestly, back from the early days of the podcast, and it's still a product I use every single morning. They have a prompt for me here. I'm going to do a little impromptu on this ad read today because honestly, this is a product that I truly believe in. And so I'm just going to tell you guys exactly what I think and why. First and foremost, this is a stat that they shared, but when you sleep, you lose between a pound and a pound and a half of water. And most of that's just sweating while you sleep. I used to not know if that was actually true, to be honest. I felt like a pound to a pound and a half of water seemed like quite a bit while I slept. But the one thing I did constantly pay attention to when I started using Routine was just the fact that before using Routine, I always felt a little dehydrated in the morning. And I'm one of those people that when I get up really early usually. I work out. One of the first things I do is some form of fitness. It's just like what I do before everyone's awake. And so it's very easy for me to grab a coffee, pre-workout, an energy drink, something with caffeine in it, and just go. When I am good about using Routine, first, I basically they come in these little single serve packets. They contain half an organic lemon, a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar, Himalayan sea salt, all 6 essential electrolytes, and they have no sugar in them at all. A lot of hydration products are going to have sugar. So one of the things about Routine that I love is that there's no sugar in there. So when I am good about doing this consistently, I will take one of those single serve packets, I'll throw it in my mixer bottle, and whether I also put in a pre-workout or something with caffeine or I just drink that separately, I try to drink that first. And the days I do that, I do genuinely feel hydrated and just have a different form of clarity all morning. A lot of people have tried to make their own homemade versions of Routine, right? You see people they take a shot of the apple cider vinegar, they put a little sea salt, a little lemon in a drink. This is essentially that, but in a product that you can take with you on the go, have it ready for you first thing in the morning. I know me personally, when I'm groggy rolling out of bed, the last thing I want to do is, squeeze a lemon, cut lemons up, go get the apple cider vinegar, find my sea salt. I just rip this packet open, throw it in my water, drink it, and it's good to go. You can try yours today. If you haven't tried it yet and you've been listening to this podcast for years, just try the damn Routine. Give it a shot. You can use code ShaneWhite30 and get 30% off your first order. So you get 30% off by using code ShaneWhite30 and go to yourroutine.com. To make it even easier, I've added the link to yourroutine.com in the show notes. So just click on the show notes for this episode, click on the link to yourroutine.com, and don't forget to use code ShaneWhite30. All right, guys, today's episode is also brought to you by NeuroRoast. Again, I'm going to go a little off script here. NeuroRoast is a product that I also came across during this year of 2023. They are a coffee company that's helping you optimize your brain function and overall well-being. This is another product that, to be honest with you, when I first started working with it, I was a little on the fence. I was like, do I really want to have mushrooms in my coffee? Well, folks, I will tell you, when I use NeuroRoast, one of the things that has stood out to me the most is I'll back up. People that know me know that I have way too much caffeine, typically. One of the things this year I've done a good job of is cutting out alcohol. Not completely, but predominantly, I don't touch a lot of alcohol anymore. What I think I've actually done the other way, though, is add a lot more caffeine. So I do definitely drink too much caffeine. That's something I need to work on next year, is just trying to minimize how much of that. But NeuroRoast is something that has actually helped me because of the way they've formulated their coffee. Like, unlike regular coffee, which is still something I consume, but NeuroRoast specifically doesn't cause jitters or crashes. Mushroom coffee provides a more balanced and sustained energy, allowing you to stay focused and productive throughout the day. So the times I do use NeuroRoast, I'll be honest, I just don't feel that jittery, like, I'm jumping out of my chair or standing here at my desk jumping around feeling. So give NeuroRoast a try. They have some really good flavors. I'll be honest too, the two guys that started NeuroRoast are just really good dudes based out of New York, and they're hustling, and hopefully they can get some people to try NeuroRoast this holiday season by listening to this podcast. So for you folks who've been on the fence, I'm telling you, it tastes delicious. They've done a fantastic job of making this coffee not only be functional, but taste fantastic. And if you want to try NeuroRoast, you can use code ShaneWhite. So it's super simple, just ShaneWhite at checkout. you'll also get 30% off. So if you go to neuroroast.com, and once again, I have added that to the show notes. So just click into the show notes while you're listening to this episode. You can click on NeuroRoast link directly. Don't forget to use code just Shane White, and you'll get 30% off your order. Hope you guys love both these products. I'm trying to not only bring you guys products that I use, but that I believe in on the podcast. I'm not taking ad reads for any brands that I don't really believe in. So anyway, hope you guys love both those products, yourroutine.com and neuroroast.com. I've added those links to the show notes. Hope you guys love it. And I got an awesome guest coming up right after this. All right, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Shane White Show. I'm pumped today. I don't get to talk to a lot of protein bar founders, and obviously with my RxBar background, this one is really exciting because Will's doing some really cool stuff. But everyone, welcome to the show. Will Nitze from IQBAR. Will, thanks for taking the time, man. Nice to meet you.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. For everyone listening who doesn't know who you are, doesn't know what your brand is, would you mind just giving a quick overview of you and your product?
Sure. Yeah, I'm a now Miami resident. Just moved from Boston not too long ago with my wife, and founder and CEO at IQBAR. We're a brain and body nutrition company. Our namesake product line, and by far our biggest product line, are IQBAR plant protein bars. So it's really the only bar optimized for your brain and body. But we also make IQ Mix hydration mixes, similar idea, brain and body hydration. And then IQ Joe instant mushroom coffees, so an enhanced mushroom coffee. And we're in about, I think now over 10,000 doors. Still the business is majority e-commerce, but I think by end of year we'll be roughly 50-50. So very much omni-channel. And that's us.
Love it. Love it. And you know, one thing, Will, as I was doing my research and as we chatted before I hit record, you know, I've obviously seen you guys everywhere. And, you know, since I'm on Amazon all day, I see you guys all the time. The first question I wanted to ask, even before we kind of get into your 0 to 1 part of your story, is I actually, in a really positive light, and I would be honest with you if I felt differently, I really like the products that you brought to market. And I would argue that most people who know much about CPG, they would look at your assortment and maybe at first be like, wait, they have a bar, they have a drink mix, and then they have a mushroom coffee. Would you mind giving everyone just like, I would love to know the thought process. And I'm sure you've had I'm sure you had 1,000 other ideas of items you could have brought to market, or you could have done even what RxBar did, which was first we went through like so many flavor launches of just the RxBar. Would you mind just kind of giving us the background on how you landed on the three product types that you really have live today?
Yeah. So I would say at first you want to look at the root of what is the point of your business, right? And then weave in some other dynamics, like what do acquirers want if your goal is to be acquired and things like that. And generally speaking, the best business model, as well as the most desirable asset for an acquirer, is something where you have one form factor and you take that to infinity. So RxBar, we were talking about it before we started recording, like caught lightning in a bottle. And it's, I would argue, close to impossible to recreate all the dynamics that made that such a special moment and outcome. And I'm not so arrogant as to think I can recreate that. But to be clear, that is the best setup for obvious reasons, right? It's a simpler business. Acquirers can wrap their head around it. Operationally, it's better. You have one co-packer or a small set of co-packers. You're producing one form factor the same way many more times. There's economies of scale on cost of goods. You have a very clear identity. Oh, you are a bar company that uses simple ingredients, like blah, blah, blah. It's better in all those ways. Here's where it's not as good, because there's a series of reasons it's not as good. Number one, there may be a ceiling to that form factor, right? If the goal is, let's say, get to 100 million in sales, it might be far easier to get there by selling 2 or 3 things in aggregate that get you to 100 than selling that one thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, there just might be a ceiling. You don't know if there is, but there might be. The second thing is, for an e-com first business, having one form factor is not good for AOV. It's not good for building the biggest basket possible, because how many bars do you want? Like,
Sure. Yeah.
it's like, it's hard to convince someone to buy 200 bars. It's much easier to convince them to buy 50 bars and then some hydration and then some coffee, because that's an analog of going into a store and I pick this and that, not just this and more this and more this and more this. Right?
Yeah. Okay. For sure.
And so, however, the caveat to that would be, the things need to be non-cannibalizing. So let's say you have a bar, but then bites, which are just, let's say, a bar chopped up more or less. Well, those two things cannibalize each other. So you actually didn't improve your AOV because I bought that instead of this. So the way we look at category expansion is very different. I would argue radically different than the way anyone else looks at it, which is, we want there to be no overlap, entirely non-cannibalizing, and also entirely complementary, meaning A enhances B or vice versa. And A, B, and C can be consumed throughout the day, and it's a beautiful experience that is complementary. And so that's number one. So we just decided, hey, we think we can get to 100 million quicker. We can build bigger baskets online by expanding categories. And then you get into a long laundry list of other things, which is, has to be a big market, has to be an e-com friendly market. The form factor has to be at minimum 1 year shelf life, has to be light and not spoil in heat. We have to think, it has to be really coherent with brain and body nutrition. So it has to make sense for the brand. It has to be, like I said earlier, non-cannibalizing, blah, 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 blah. And so basically we looked at all those things and we said, we identified 3 categories: hydration, coffee, and sleep. So satiation, hydration, caffeination, and sleep are all relevant to brain and body optimal function. And we dropped sleep for a variety of reasons. We said we want to expand into 2 and have a 3-legged stool. So let's take 2 out of these 3 as 2 expansions. And we dropped sleep because we felt it was too commoditized. Everyone kind of had melatonin or some form of that. We didn't like the primary form factor, which seems to be gummies, which are not good in heat. The manufacturing setup is not good. There's an oligopoly of manufacturers. Ollie and others are gobbling up all the line temp, blah, blah, blah. And so we're like, all right, it's going to be hydration, it's going to be coffee. And now we have this epic 3-legged stool of satiation, caffeination, hydration.
Love it.
So that's how we think about it.
Got it. Okay. No, I mean, it's super smart. And hearing you say, like, this was our idea on how we get to 100 million is really interesting too, because I don't know how many founders early on really think through that whole potential end goal, right? I think that's really like getting ahead of it. It's also really interesting because I think a lot of brands over time come up with the same problem that you're already addressing, which is like, how does someone choose our brand throughout multiple times of the day? Which again, that even at our IQBAR, that was something we were always trying to figure out, because when we were so deep into bars, then we had the idea of oatmeal and nut butter, and like they didn't really like, some would argue that the oatmeal cannibalized the bars because it was like people were having bars at breakfast on the go.
Totally.
Right. So what you're doing is ingenious. And do you see people typically have the bars and the coffee maybe even together in the morning and hydration later in the day? Or is that
you could have all
thing? 3
in the morning.
Sure.
I have all 3 in the morning. So, because again, they're entirely non-cannibalizing and complementary. Like, you eat to give yourself fuel and calories and satiated.
Sure.
You hydrate because you just slept in a bed and weren't drinking for 8 hours. Like, you need to hydrate first thing in the morning.
Right.
And then you caffeinate if you drink coffee or tea or what have you, which I do. And I think 70% of Americans do every morning. So it's like you're solving 3 distinct problems all in the morning. And then, frankly, those problems crop up again in the afternoon, to a lesser extent in the evening, but also in the evening to some degree. So that's the beauty. It's like, it's relevant actually in each tranche of the day.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, how many people grab caffeine? I know I do in the afternoon. How many people grab something like a bar when they're in between meetings or running around going from whatever to whatever? It's a really good point. Well, So I love that. I wanted to start with that because I just thought, honestly, out of all the brands I've had on here, you guys might have the most unique set of product types of anyone that I've ever met. So I want to start there. I want to back up though and give everyone listening a little bit of an overview of how you even came up with the concept of the brand, right? And so obviously, you went to school, and I believe doing my research, you had one job out of school, like at an actual company, right? But did you always, even when you were in school, did you have like when did you have this concept? Was it while you were in college? Was it after that when you were working? Where did the actual concept of IQ as a brand really start to come up?
I was always trying stuff in college, like selling T-shirts and random entrepreneurial stuff. And I even had tech ideas. And then I was like, oh, do I want to learn how to code? I really hate coding. Do I want to find a co-founder? I don't know. Like, so I was always spinning the wheels entrepreneurially in college. And I knew that I wanted to do something on my own at some point in time, but I just sort of ran out of time by the time I was a senior. And all my friends were doing banking and consulting and stuff like that. And I knew I didn't want to do that. I knew that would not make me happy. And also I knew that would get me put me on a path to getting golden handcuffs. So I'd be working my ass off, but also making a lot of money. And then at some point, a couple of years in, the opportunity cost would be so high that you're just not going to quit and start something. So anyway, I took a job in software selling operations and supply chain software to oil and gas companies. Super random, but was something to do, and got really good at it. But I didn't like software, and I didn't like oil and gas.
Okay.
So at that time, I got really into nutrition, which I was not really into in college or any time before that. I imagine you grew up eating like Fruity Pebbles and Pop-Tarts and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, Pop-Tarts and orange juice was like my high school breakfast, nutritious and ready to hit the day running.
Exactly. Yeah. So I had no pedigree of nutrition personally, and I also didn't know anything about it. But
right, yeah.
I started feeling terribly at my job, and I was working long hours, and I had a bad diet, and I just started getting into paleo was the first thing. And I read this book called Grain Brain, which changed the way I thought about food as it relates to the brain. So having a high blood glucose level, today sucks because now you're tired in the afternoon, but it really sucks if you do that for 20, 30 years, because then your odds of getting dementia or even just garden variety cognitive decline are way higher. Maybe Alzheimer's odds are higher, et cetera. And so I was like, whoa, that's crazy. I didn't even think of that.
It's so funny. I'm way behind you. I'm just I actually started wearing one of those like level CGM devices just because I had some weird blood work come back. And so I'm kind of like years behind you, but I'm learning. I've known a lot about like the paleo diet, obviously from RX, but it's been interesting what you're talking about is like fresh news to me. So
yeah, no, I think the continuous glucose monitoring space and interest in it will only grow. Yeah, because it's just quite clear that having elevated glucose for long periods of time is only going to lead to bad outcomes.
Right.
But yeah, I was interested in the bad brain outcomes. And so I thought, okay, this is really interesting. I want to do my own thing. I'm not a coder. It's not going to be a tech thing. It would be a product thing. I'm starting to get into nutrition. Maybe I make a nutritional consumer good item. I also read a book called Mission in a Bottle by the guys who started Honest Tea. Seth
nice.
Goldman and Barry Nailbuff. Really great book. But I really identified with Seth because we both went to Harvard undergrad. We were both government majors. And I was just like, I am this guy. And he was a consultant and hated it and then started Honest Tea. And I was like, oh cool. I'm going to do what he did. And so it was the combination. Those two books changed a lot for me. And so, yeah, I just thought of, okay, what if I made a bar that fixes these brain problems, or at least has none of the things that are bad for your brain? Because subtraction is actually like the most impactful thing, not addition.
Sure. Yeah.
And that was it. And so I tinkered around in my kitchen for a straight year and did a Kickstarter. And the idea was, if that goes well, I'll quit my job and do it. And it went well. And that was how it started.
Wow. And then why'd you land on bars? I have to ask that just because it's so interesting when people pick bars.
Honestly, the RX outcome was like a wow factor for me. And I think was 2016?
2017.
Okay, 2017. Yeah. So that was like, I had recency bias. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
whoa, that's a really interesting outcome and big category. And there's not that, I wanted to include a bunch of brain nutrients in the product, and there's not that many form factors where you can like mash a bunch of stuff together and it's an edible thing. It's like
Right.
bars or like cookies, it's like, what else
Very
is
true.
there?
Mm-hmm.
And the bar market's way bigger than the cookie market. So, and I wanted to build a really big company. So I was like, I need to be in a big growing category. And so it was just sort of a process of elimination. I was like, okay, this is a good category. Good unit economics. Our IQBAR just had this crazy outcome. Of course, I didn't know at the time that that was a wild outlier of an outcome, but naivete is useful in that way.
For sure.
And yeah, so that's what I think.
No, it makes sense. And for you at this point, you have a job, you're out of school. Was this a tinkering? You said you did it for about a year. So was Will's thought like, I'm going to get this product to a place that's really good and I'm quitting my job and I'm going to scale this thing? Or was it a little slower? Was it like, I'm going to tinker with it, I'm going to get some friends and family to try it? Like, what were those like in that first year? Where were people trying it? Where were you trying to sell it? How did that all look for you?
I, for better or worse, wanted to move very fast and build the biggest thing I could as fast as I could. And so we skipped the period of sending it to family and working at a commissary kitchen and making a couple hundred and selling it to some corner stores and then making 1,000 and then making 10,000. Skipped all of it.
Oh, cool. Okay.
And we were like, okay, we want to jump right into contract manufacturing and make like 20, 30,000 of these things and then just try and swim. It's like jumping in a fast current river and just trying to keep up with it.
Do you mind me asking, why was that your thought?
I'm impatient, I think is a big one. I've had to learn to become more patient, but I'm inherently impatient. I want a lot now, a lot meaning whatever, results. And I also had just known of other people who started their company via a Kickstarter and did really well. And I mean, even now, like we're sort of surprised by our growth rate. We don't, it's not even necessarily desirable. Like It's really stressful to grow, to double or more year over year. It's extremely unnatural and artificially, you're growing in an artificial way, right? Like businesses weren't designed to grow that fast. And so a bunch of stuff's gonna break and you just have to be you have to be one step ahead. So it's not even like necessarily good. It just, I have a very hard time saying no to things and throttling back. And again, it's good and bad. But yeah, I just didn't know what to expect. And the growth just started happening fast. It wasn't like I need to grow fast. It was like, let's grow as fast as we can and see where the chips fall. And then just a couple things happened. Like we did the Kickstarter. We sold 75K on Kickstarter, 15K on Indiegogo. So 90K total. And we were selling Phantom Air, right? It was the idea of a product. And then 6 months later, we delivered on that. That was mid 2018. And then we listed on Amazon and we were e-com first and keto hit. And for like total windfall of a dynamic because we made the product low carb for the brain benefits. And it just so happened everyone and their mother was interested in low carb, low sugar for like body fat purposes.
It's funny, Will. I don't know if I specifically remember your brand, but I do vividly remember in 2018, like we had a pretty high level meeting at our IQBAR where we were kicking around whether keto was here to stay or if it was a fad. And I remember sitting at this table with a lot of people at our IQBAR where like it was a really 50-50 split. And I remember sitting there being like, no, I think keto's going to stay. And I could be mistaken. I kind of do remember you guys though, maybe being in this conversation, and we were trying to point out some brands that were already on Amazon that were picking up, really, really quickly. It's just so funny you said that in the year you said it, because I vividly remember this meeting and at a crossroads we were at.
It turned out it was a fad. It just happened to last way longer than anyone thought. So everyone thought it'd be 1, 2, max 3-year fad. It turned out to be a 7-year fad. So
so you actually do think it was a fad though? You think?
Yeah, I mean, look at it now. Who talks about keto now? Look at the Google search volume for keto over the trailing 5 years, and it's a downward curve.
Do you think it's a fad, or I also think there could be a component of that whole space has gotten a little complicated because you could also say low carb, keto. even like
blood
meat
sugar
forward.
friendly.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
There's
Like
all these,
yeah,
but that's always
exactly.
been the case, right? Atkins was the first one to be low carb, low net carb, low sugar, and then it's the same thing being repackaged. So it's
Sure.
like keto was just a way of packaging the same principle that made Atkins a huge brand back in the
Right.
day.
Right.
But I think a mistake a lot of people made was tethering themselves or marrying themselves to keto. They added keto into the DNA of the brand, and so they would succeed or fail based on the success or failure of the trend, and that's just a deadly mistake.
Right.
Because it did waver and fall off, and like now, like retail, like category managers will come to us and tell us, don't put the word keto on your packaging. We have all the
Really?
data. We know people don't want it. Take it off your packaging. So, and by the way, a year prior,
Wow.
we had keto in huge letters on all our packaging because it converted so well. Because if you're on that diet, you see it, you're like, meh,
100%. Especially on
connect the
Amazon,
dots, press
right?
buy. And but I mean, in the early years, we benefited just massively from it because there weren't that many keto bars. There was, like 5 or
Mm-hmm.
maybe less. And so, yeah, that was our first inflection point.
Okay. Yeah, it's wild. Like I feel like in most stories like this, there's always, whether it's like perfect timing or not, there's some form of timing. And that is a wild time that you guys decided to launch online, because that was a wild time now that I think back to it.
But look at all the beneficiaries of that trend. They're all dead.
Yeah,
Like
that's true.
90+% are dead. It's sad. It sucks. We are one of the few that like sort of repositioned out of it and kept growing. But that's why I say like it was such a learning for us of, wow, thank God we never put the word keto in our trademark or like became too tethered. All we did was go to keto meetups, and that's our growth lever. Like, thank God we didn't just go all in on that.
Sure. And hindsight's 2020, but do you remember back, was there a crossroad there where you made that decision not to really tether yourself to that? Like it was a feature, but it wasn't the focus, or not? Because it was always brain
No,
brain
because we
focus, really.
always keto was a big piece of it, but so was like the rise of plant protein and the brain piece of it as an. That's it's funny. I talked to Peter, founder, one of the co-founders of IQBAR, who lives down the road from me now, and he was always like, funnily enough, critical of our brand. He's like, you guys tried to do so much, and I was like, it's actually one of the things I fundamentally disagreed with him on.
Okay.
Because I think he has his own bias and I have my own. I think his own bias was, okay, at our IQBAR, we nailed one thing and we just did it right. And I was saying you nailed the form factor and really leaned in on that, but also the positioning and messaging around that form factor. Simple ingredients, here they are, there on the front. And that works so well, and that's great. But I feel the same way about that as I feel about the whole scaling to 100 million. Yes, that's the best thing if it's an evergreen trend and you catch lightning in a bottle and can ride that trend. Yes, that's the best. But again, if I had done that with keto, we'd be dead. If I had done that with whatever else, fiber interest comes and goes, right? So for us, I think of the form factor, the platform, bars, hydration, coffee, the same way intra category, messaging wise, I think about it that same way. So our bar has to appeal to people who just want a plant protein bar, but also people who like the brain functionality, but also people who like low carb, low sugar, but also people who just want a chocolate bar for $2.09. We have to be able to hook all these different cohorts into a consumer base. Is that harder? Is that messier? Yes, but it allows us to grow through the waxing and waning of any one of those trends.
Okay. No, I think that's really, really smart. It's funny. I don't, without knowing Peter's full thought there, I always thought too, maybe as a, someone who came to the party a couple years after it was started, right? Like I joined in 2017. So I was obviously not there at the beginning, but there right before the acquisition. I if you think back to like what was happening to validate your point, right? Like it was simple. I always think like, yeah, it hit the head on paleo at a time where paleo was becoming really popular. We kind of hit Whole 30. We hit the rise of when CrossFit really started to become I want to call it mainstream, but like definitely had some of its fastest growing years. It's actually slowed down post acquisition with Kellogg. But at the end of the day, it was simple. And I always thought that like part of it was all of those little accolades. But at the end of the day, we came into a category that was just, there was so many options with so many ingredients in all the bars. And we were just like, hey, this is just super basic. And it was kind of what you said at the very beginning of this, which is like, I think IQBAR did a good job of just subtracting a lot out and just making it really simple to the consumer. And to your point, they were able to ride through kind of some of those waves and then just hit like mass like they just hit like the masses, like getting into the Costco's, the Walmarts, being widely distributed across Amazon. I mean, for a while when someone searched protein bar on Amazon, you saw us. So those people didn't even know what they wanted or needed. They just were trying to find something that was at a good price and probably was simple to understand, right? So it's a really good point, Will, and I would agree with you. Do you think, as you think back, I think the other question that really made me take a pause was you said just to fast forward and go to basically mass manufacturing or going to a co-man. The first thing I thought of when you said that was just because, again, I've told you this, my background's in finance, was just like that to me, I'm as a founder now, like I definitely like the slower one out of me and my co-founder. Like I'm the one that's a little more methodical, a little more like math based, and I'm the one that slows us down. He speeds us up. So when I heard you say that, I was like, oh my goodness, what was the thoughts Will must have gone through, and how did you ultimately, like, how did you decide to finance that? That was going to be my big question, because that, for I would argue 99% of people I've had on here, the thought of like going from your kitchen to a commercial kitchen to co-man that's a huge piece of the puzzle usually that I see people stumble on. You just zoomed right to the big league. So like, I would love to just hear your thoughts if you remember back to that and how you decided to fund it, how you decided to make that happen.
Yeah. I mean, the only way to right size your P&L in consumer goods is scale. And so I think part of the impatience I have is wanting to get to cash flow positive, which very, very, very few CPG startups are.
Mm-hmm.
We just this year, we're trying to do somewhere between 55 and 60 million in revenue this year. We just this year became meaningfully profitable.
Wow.
That's crazy, right? So
good for you, by the way, too. I didn't realize you guys were at that level. So hell yeah. Congratulations.
Thank you. But we had to, and I mean, this year will grow something like 150% over last year.
Wow.
So again, you're like, oh, that's crazy growth. Why are you growing that fast? That's not healthy. It's shit's going to break. It's because and the market now, which was not the case in the IQBAR days, is basically saying you have to get meaningfully cash flow positive and grow really fast.
Mm-hmm.
It was very much cash flow positive was subservient to growth in that area, and that is not the case now.
That's changed so much.
And so, which is crazy, right? Basically, the M&A and investment community is demanding perfection,
and there's only going to be unicorn exits, it feels like right now.
Yeah, you can't sell a business unless it's doing 100 million in revenue. Mm-hmm. That's still small for Kellogg's, General Mills, whatever. So I think that impatience, doesn't come out of nowhere. Yes, I'm impatient naturally, but mostly actually I think I've just learned you have to get to scale to right size your P&L. And so why I wanted to hit the ground running was like, I want to get to scale. Because you're let's say I think our cost per bar was $1.25 or something, and you're like selling for $1.25 to UNFI or KE or these distributors, so it's like it's crazy. You have terrible unique economics. So going slow is good and well in that you're using less money, but you're going to be bleeding constantly until you get scale. So I'd rather just like rip the Band-Aid off and try to get to that scale. But
got it. Yeah.
How sense. Did we finance it? We raised money.
Yeah. Okay.
But we to this day, I think at the end of this year, our lifetime revenue will be over 100 million, and we've raised in aggregate less than 10 million.
Good for you. Wow.
So we try to deliver in lifetime sales, $10 for every $1 that we've ever raised. And then in trailing 12 months, $5 for every lifetime dollar we've raised. So we've been incredibly capitally efficient, but we still had to raise 625K at the outset. And then a year later, $1 million. And then 2 years after that, 2.775. And then 2 years after that, 5 million. We needed every one of those. We couldn't have survived. You take one of those out, the company fails.
Sure.
So
yeah.
It is
That's a really cool
game.
way though, Will, to think. I've never heard someone just lay it out like that, like dollar in versus dollar of revenue for your investors. That's a really smart, simple way to lay that out.
Yeah. I mean, how if I'm putting $1 in and you are getting me back 50 cents in revenue, that's not a very good business. Now you could come back and say, well, actually it is a pretty good business because everything's going for a multiple of revenue and it's a 5x revenue. So you're getting 250 back on the back end on the exit for your $1 you put in.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe if it was 2018, maybe, right? Or even as soon as 2021, maybe, yeah. But it isn't. And now that dynamic just totally blew up. Got
it. Yeah, that makes tons of sense. So, wow. Okay. And I would be curious too. So you to do that initial raise to really go to mass production, that happened in what year? 2018? Is that what you said?
Yeah, 2018. So December 2017 to Jan 18, we did the Kickstarter. That got us enough money just to make product, but we were certainly not surviving off the operational cash flow from that. That was like proving the semblance of product market fit. And then we turned around and we said, hey, we have 90K in sales. We're going to raise 625K from angels. And so that was what allowed me to make the first hire and start investing ad dollars and everything's so inefficient, right? There's also just fuck ups,
fair
manufacturing fuck ups, whatever, just stuff goes wrong. Legal fees you didn't expect. You just need some buffer too. I don't even know why we picked 600. I think we backed into $500,000 and then we're like, let's get like 150K of buffer, but it was somewhat arbitrary.
Okay. Well, it's so interesting because at that stage too, it was really a dream, if I'm not mistaken, right? Because there wasn't really a lot of sales to then say like, hey, we're doing this much in sales on this much in advertising. We know if you give us this, we'll get our COGS down and we can scale revenue here. It sounds like it was pretty early in that part of the story. So what was a big part for people listening? Because I think this is such a unique part of your story. What were some of the key things you were even trying to sell to investors and angels at that time? Like, was it the scale? Was it the exit? Because you have such a good idea of like where you're going that I'm sure that had to have been a big part of it. But just thinking through those initial pitches on that first round, I'd love to know if you remember even what were some of the big key call outs that you were at, like trying to sell.
I mean, it's just some degree it's the product and the product literally, but then also the positioning. Is this unique positioning? Is the market, the standard stuff, is the market big enough? Can this become a big company? Blah, blah, blah. And of course you're saying yes. So how good are you of a salesman at being convincing on those vectors? But, the Kickstarter helped a lot. I think if I went to people with a deck and I was like, hey, here's all this idea and all this theoretical stuff, I think I'd be a lot less successful raising than, oh, hey, we just sold $90,000 of real product in our first 2 months.
Right.
That's
right.
The power of crowdfunding. I have no idea what the state of crowdfunding is today. But at the time, it was still a very powerful way to start because those are real sales and I didn't have to spend the money on the COGS to make the product. They're pre-sales. And so it's just a little hack, it's a chicken or egg hack to be able to get those sales, to raise the money, to produce the product, to even deliver on those sales. So I do think that was huge. And then it is true. It's a bit cliched, but it is true that like they're betting on you as a person. So because even the product, I think it's a mistake when early investors like look at a product and they don't like it. They don't like the taste. And it's like, dude, you can just change the taste. That's not that hard. You should be way more focused on that person sitting across from you. do they have what it takes over the next 10 years to grow this into a big business? And you're focusing on sort of things that can be fairly easily changed and will change. Like no matter what, even if it's a great product, it'll change anyway because you have to move to a new co-packer, and to scale, you need to tweak this and that and blah, blah. So it just will change. Focus way more on the person. Is that person like a killer? You know, do they have what it takes to do this at a very high level and for 10 years? Both things have to be true.
That's a really good point, Will, because that's so true. Like, especially just being in the food industry for as long as I have now. Yeah, things are changing all the time. So if you either pinned your wagon to what it tasted like today or didn't because of just the taste, that's a great point. It's like you're right. You definitely leaned into the right things.
Well, I remember Peter like told me like they changed. I think even like Kellogg's like brought in a bunch of food scientists and subtly tweaked our IQBARs, make them moister. And yeah, it's like even post-acquisition changes are made. It's like it doesn't even stop once you get acquired. In fact, they might change more, right? So that's like never, yes, you want to believe the baseline product has a really good shot of winning.
Yeah.
But, and by the way, I'm just focusing on one variable. There are other sort of aesthetic variables that I just think people over-index on when they make their investment decisions, versus like the way, way more important variable of, is this person going to take me to the promised land?
Sure. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. Totally makes sense. And so you go produce bars. The other thing I'm assuming, Will, just from talking to you today, did you try to go build a team pretty quickly? Like, was that part of the strategy as well, as to get a few people with you to run fast?
I tried to attract a co-founder, but I couldn't. The only reason I didn't have a co-founder is because I couldn't find one, or I couldn't convince someone to do it. Meanwhile, it's the best thing that ever happened. At the time, I thought it was the worst thing that ever happened. But like, if I do this a second time, I'm gonna do it solo again. Like, I just believe the benevolent dictator model is the best model. Personally, I know it can work with co-founders, but once I raised a little bit of money, I was like, okay, I need to hire. Basically, the way I thought of it is there's sales and marketing, there's ops and supply chain. I do all four of them. I need to split it. Which side do I want to own? I want to own sales and marketing. Okay, I need to hire a ops, supply chain, finance person. So I hired this guy, Alex, who's great. And I was like, I can only pay you this much. And do you want to do it? And I met him through a mutual friend. And he said, yes. So we ran as a 2-person business for a while. This is what I think a lot of people don't understand is if you stand up a CPG brand and e-com is your primary channel, you can, especially via patching together third parties, agencies and things like that. I mean, you can run a 1, 2, 3-person shop doing well over $10 million.
Oh yeah,
fairly easily.
Like, for sure.
The head count will not be what stops you from getting to 10 million. If you're not getting to 10 million, it's some other variable. The product doesn't work, whatever. But it's not the head count, because I know that because I did it, so and like, dude, we have 6 office employees, right? So we're like approaching 10 million ahead in revenue per person. So
I love how you're putting everything into like dollars. For me, this is like music to my ears. I love the way you're thinking about it. It's great.
Yeah, I mean, because people will often say, okay, if you can add $1 million in revenue, you can hire 1 new person. That's like a common thing people say. For me, that number should be like 3, 4, 5 million in CPG in this context. That's just my opinion. Other people have done it differently, but that's how we think about it. Like, this person needs to add like 5 million in revenue, because each person is a burden for a while before they're an asset.
100%.
Hiring them is a burden. So like the period preceding them being on the team is a burden. So for a small team to go through that and hire them and train them, and there's a 50% chance they don't work out, you got to be bringing in 5 million in revenue.
That makes a ton of sense. I actually heard this on a podcast yesterday of, it was actually Dave Ramsey on Theo Vaughn's podcast, which is a hilarious combination of 2 people who are total polar opposites. And they were basically talking about, if someone's trying to get a raise or trying to, change their place in an organization, you should change the way you talk about it and be like, how can I bring more value to the organization? How can I produce more dollars for the organization so that I can get paid more? I was like, that's such a genius way to just like flip the script and think about it. And for someone like you who's starting a business and thinking about bringing a few people on, yeah, I mean, I think probably you will too. You saw like where the business was trending, even just with you, and you're like, hey, I know I can do X, Y, and Z. I can keep going at this rate. If I want to go faster, this person needs to unlock X amount additional of time, energy, and expertise. Now that you look back, do you think you did that right? Do you think you taking sales and marketing and hired someone for operations and finance, that was the right split?
Yes, I do. I also took product, which I think was also the right move. So it's a very common move to outsource to, you think, oh, I don't have the institutional knowledge. I'm not a food scientist, whatever. And so you pay some formulation house or you hire some food scientists or whatever. I think that's a mistake. I think just like if I was going to start a tech company, I would force myself to learn to code and I would code it myself. I think it's important for the founder to really intimately understand the product, ideally create the product themselves, and understand the manufacturing side of it. Because like I said, it's going to change. And what are you going to have to rehire that formulation house? And well, now the lead is on vacation and you get swapped to another person or they quit or whatever. There's so many other variables. Whereas if it's in your head, you can make really rapid changes and iterations and solve problems, supply chain problems. We own our own supply chain.
Yeah,
most people do a turnkey. So the co-packer buys all the inputs and they just get a bill per bar or per unit of whatever. And we took all of that in-house. We buy all our inputs. So if there's a chocolate shortage, we can solve it. We can jump into action versus some random person at the co-packer who's like, oh, I guess I can't get chocolate. You're like, that's not
And then they probably
acceptable.
also pass back whatever price they had to get for this other chocolate to Will. And now Will's dealing with price per bar
they're not
issues.
incentivized to get better pricing. No skin
Right.
off their back if the price goes up. They're not going to bend over backwards. They're not going to make calls on a Saturday, right? Blah, blah, blah. So,
right.
And that's mission critical. If you're not making product, you don't have a business. So we took that in-house. So we understand our supply chain way better than most people. So yeah, sales and marketing was the right play, but product, manufacturing, supply chain, I think the founder / early COO and or CFO have to really intimately understand that. And I prefer to control it internally. Downsides, you have to have millions of ingredients on your books.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, cash can create some cash flow issues, but I would still take it. If you can withstand that, I would still take it for those other reasons.
That makes a ton of sense. To bring up Peter one more time, it was funny. Even when I joined, so a few months after the acquisition, the office that I joined, which I think was number 3, maybe, or 2, I can't remember. It wasn't our big one that we ended up ending at, but there was a kitchen. So there was an actual kitchen with a glass window, and it's where like they made a lot of the new flavors, and that's where all the food scientists worked for our IQBAR. And I always thought it was so cool that even after the acquisition, so months after the deal was done, Peter would still get up from his desk and just go in there and tinker and work on stuff. Like that was just like, I can tell you're the same kind of person where when you're obsessed with the product that you sell, you can be on a board call, you can be putting a pitch deck together, you can do all this busy, desk work. But if you like love the product, you probably end up just going back and trying to make the product always better. And he even did that after the deal was done, which was cool. You can tell it's what he really loves. You sound very similar to that.
Totally. The product is what, there's nothing that beats R&D, right? It's like, it's just fun to make something out of nothing. If you're sitting and living in Excel spreadsheets, it's just so fun to like stand on your 2 feet and do stuff with your hands and make something like that.
Sure.
You got to mix that in.
That makes total sense. That makes total sense. So we heard where you're at, Will. I would love to even now fast forward as we kind of get down to the last 10 minutes or so here. Where are you heading? So you said, 150% year over year growth is where you're trending this year. Knowing even from the beginning of the podcast where you said where you're trying to get north of 100 million at the growth rate you're going, if I just do back the napkin math, do you think 2025 is the year that you guys could potentially surpass that?
I think so. Yeah, I think we can. I think we have a good shot at cracking 9 figures in revenue next year. We'll see. A couple things have to go right, but I think they will. So, yeah, I mean, for better or worse, we try to double the business. and sometimes more than double it. But that's our goal. And we have more of a top down than a bottoms up approach to that. So instead of saying, okay, here's all our accounts, and if these are our velocities, we can grow the velocities this much and bring on these new accounts, like bottoms up, that's going to spit out this amount of revenue. We actually do it the opposite way. We do a top down. So we say, okay, let's say we had to double. How would you double? Those are fundamentally different thought processes.
Yes.
Because, and I actually prefer top down because it forces you to be creative. Like gun to your head, you have to double. So I don't care that you're telling me bottoms up will be 80% growth. You need 100% growth. And there's always a way. And so it just forces you to get creative. Okay, well, I guess we could do this, or we could launch this new product, or we could do these new limited time offers or whatever. Okay, yeah, that gets us to 100%. So I prefer top down.
It's really interesting you're saying that. I probably lived in a world for a little bit where there was such a big disconnect from top down versus the bottoms up that it was like this delta was, we probably didn't do a good enough job of actually doing what you just did, which is sitting there and ideating on not just the basics of what make up velocity improvement, but actually like what you just said, like launching a new product, getting a lot more creative. I think that's probably something as organizations transparently get north of 100 million. It gets, maybe that's something that, you know, that's a magical part of that process you got to really hold on to, that I know I've been a part of a few now that it's tough to do. I like where your head's at though. That's a really interesting way to think about it, because it does, I would argue it does pressure test and create ideas that you don't get from the bottoms up, because the bottoms up, you're just a little bit more in the weeds. You're focused on the specifics of what is.
At some point, I do think you kind of probably shift to bottoms up, because you become somewhat saturated in some way, shape, or form. I mean, you could argue you're never saturated because there's a whole world out there. You can go international and start over in China or whatever.
Right.
But if you're looking at the domestic market, at some point you're in every channel. And so that you will at some point have to shift to bottoms up. But I mean, you're at 200 million maybe at that point.
Sure.
Like there's a long runway before you hit that saturation mark.
Right. No, that's fair. That's totally fair. Is there anything exciting that you're allowed to share, or little teasers for anyone listening who now is going to go try IQBAR that you think is going to happen in 2024, like retail distribution points or anything exciting on the innovation side?
Yeah, we have a celebrity partnership with, I would argue, the most famous chef in America.
Oh, wow. Okay.
People can take guesses on what that might be, but it's not signed yet, but I think it's there.
Hell yeah.
And so we'll be co-developing some products with him. And so very exciting about that. I think there'll be a big PR bonanza around that. And we've had little to no PR. So that'll be fun. Some retailers coming online. Some retailers we're going to meaningfully expand. Some new limited time offers we'll be doing. But honestly, more of the same. I mean, doubling and tripling down on what's working is always the best business decision. It's always better to do 2x of what's working than try to find another X floating around in the ether.
For sure.
So honestly, it'll be mostly more of the same.
Okay. I love that. Well, as we get down to the last few minutes, a couple questions I ask every founder that comes on here. The first one is, and you gave two already, I actually pinned, that I have to go back and I'll share in the show notes, but source of knowledge for everyone listening. So whether it's a book, a podcast, an article, just something that pops in your head immediately that you're like, oh, I recently read this. This is really cool, that you want to share with the audience today.
I consume a lot of short form content, for better or worse, via Twitter and things like that.
Yeah, of course.
Which have their downsides, but have their upsides. Honestly, and I have some favorite business books. Like my favorite business book of all time is How to Get Rich by Felix Dennis, the guy who started Maxim magazine. It's probably my favorite book of all time. But my biggest learnings come from weekly conversations. So I have a bench of, let's say, 5 people who I just really respect and are really thoughtful and are always developing new insights. And I'll call all 5 of them every week.
Wow. Cool.
And I learn something new in each of those calls. So I would actually, the beauty of those calls are they're ultra current. So certain content gets obsolete so fast in consumer goods and other markets too. There are tried and true principles that are evergreen, but like granular things that work are defunct within 12 months.
Sure.
Sometimes quicker.
Yeah.
And so that's why I like the real-time calls with industry experts. So I would encourage people to do that. Like find your bench of people. And there's like a guy who's I respect the most on like Amazon, and there's a guy who I respect most on product, and there's a gal who I respect most on whatever marketing principle. And so I'd say that's the biggest sort
I
of
love
knowledge.
that. How did you, is it something like you and that person have an agreed upon like weekly call meeting something, or are you just
Not
always
even
calling
agreed
them?
upon. I'll just call them, or they'll
Oh, I
call
love
me.
it. Okay.
There's
Love
no
it.
standing thing. It's like ad hoc. It's like, I wonder how that works. Dial, pick up or don't pick up. If they don't, yeah, can we chat at 3? Sure. Chat at 3.
Okay.
So it's ad hoc.
I think that's so much more. I think it's better. It's funny with everyone being remote now. I know I personally sometimes just get like, it's almost like overwhelmed with the amount of like connects and like, let's chat in 3. I love that. I love like, just like, don't even make it official. Just call me or I'll
I
call
hate
you.
scheduling
Me
stuff
too,
because
man.
then you have to go into your calendar. They go into their calendar. You have to put it there. It's like all those micro activities are what 15 minutes, and 15 minutes is precious. So just calling, pick up, get answer, move on. And knowledge now is so much better than knowledge in 2 weeks. There's a time value of knowledge,
For
right?
sure.
So I'd rather get the knowledge now.
Hell yeah. Oh, I love that. That's a great takeaway for today. I absolutely love that. This is my favorite question, Will, and it's just tools that you put around you. So as a founder, someone who I'm sure has obviously business goals yearly, you probably have personal goals as well. And then obviously there's shit you got to get done today. Are you a tools person as far as like apps? Are you a pen and paper kind of guy? Like what tools does Will put around himself to map out goals, whether it's big picture, small picture, and then ultimately just to get shit done?
I don't think I'm going to give a satisfying answer. I don't use that many tools. Like, honestly, for me, it's less tools is better. So I try to do less email and more short form commit, like Slack. Again, not that interesting of an example, but just I probably cut down on 80% of emails I did at my company before that, didn't have Slack with doing IQBAR with Slack. Like, so, I mean, Slack's just a game changer. It helps us move so much faster. And we use the huddle. So again, like, don't put something on someone's calendar and then the person's 5 minutes late, whatever. There's just a huddle function. Boop, boop. Talk it out, talk. Both sides get the answer, end huddle, move on. It's so efficient. And I would say here's the other like beauty of having very few people. You need less tools. You don't need like the big HR tools. You don't need the meeting scheduling tools. There's 6 people. That's basically no people. Just huddle them, Slack them. And so like less people means less tools, means you move faster. That's not applicable to everyone, right? If you're doing 500 million, you're not going to have 6 people. But I'm not that interested in running a $500 million business. I never will be. So the moment I would have to have a team of 30 people is the moment I probably am not doing that startup anymore. So I'm kind of anti-tool, or not anti-tool, just like, how can I have a few epically useful tools?
I like that. It's like a minimalist approach. What do you use though? Like, what do you use on a daily basis? Just like, so when Will wakes up, like, what do you know you have to work on today for IQBAR?
Yeah, I just have like a to-do list. I actually write down my to-do list. I don't know why. It's just like satisfying to cross it off.
I'm the same way. I have mine right here.
And it's just like a running list. And then we do have a weekly all hands meeting as a team, which is actually not efficient. And the point is for it not to be efficient. So it's like, I'm a big believer in not everything should be efficient, but for the things you want to be inefficient, like team building or whatever, schedule in inefficiencies.
Oh,
so you want to grab drinks just for rapport? We'll schedule in and do that post work, and you're both agreeing this is inefficient. But if there's a meeting, the point is efficiency. So don't shoot the shit. Get right into it, and be on time, and then it was really efficient, right? So like, scheduling in inefficiency is another kind of interesting topic. But yeah,
I love it.
I'm like anti wearable too. Like I don't
Are
wear
you?
wearables because then I'm having to track more things. So I'm a big like I need getting more data needs to have a possibility of changing a decision I would make.
Mm-hmm.
And if getting more data won't change that, it's useless data. And in fact, it's harmful data because if someone tells me I had a bad sleep, well, I know I had a bad sleep. Um, I like that's intuitive. And is it changing the way I tried to go to sleep? No, it's just stressing me out. Like I didn't try to have a bad sleep. I just did, and I know I did, and I don't need you to tell me I did. If I had a really good workout, I know I had a good workout. I don't need you to quantify that. And so I'm like, oh, I did 5% better. Now that's just me, right? Other people have. That's just my preference, but it's like I feel similarly about data that I do about tools. How do I actually cut data out that is not changing a decision I would make? It all filters from that. Will this change a decision I make? If not, get it out of my life.
Very interesting. It's funny you even mentioned that at the very end. I'm like almost in the other end of the spectrum where I'm like at the cliff of bailing on all of my wearables because you can see I have a Whoop on, I got the levels on, I've tried Aura, I've had Whoop for like since our IQBAR 2017, 2018. I was very early on it, but it's funny. I'm with you. There's been like if I like boil the ocean, there's probably been like 2 takeaways from having it the whole time. It's just like go to bed earlier and don't drink alcohol if you want to feel good. Like those are like the 2 things that I've learned. And then I think there's something to be said depending on the person on you're so right though. Like it depends on what you use it for. Like if you're going to obsess in a way that's like unhealthy and it's going to make you actually have to think more. I'm with you though. It's funny as you were saying that I'm thinking to myself I'm like I'm famously like I like change how I do my to-do lists. I'll like throw a wearable on, I'll take it off. And it's probably like at scale over time, such a waste of energy and time that there's probably something to be said of maybe like detoxing all of the data, all of the inputs, all of the tracking, right? Because to your point, there's probably like, and I do a thing where I pick like 3 things a day that are like my big 3 that I'm focused on. That's helped me a lot. I definitely have ADHD if you can't tell. So I'm like, some days I'm like all over the place, get excited about different things at different times. But it's funny you said that.
I listened to a pod with Tim Ferriss, right? Who's like Mr. Optimizer.
Mm-hmm.
So interesting. Listen to anything he put out recently. He's like, I've way decelerated on the optimization thing. And he's like, here's why. Optimize for what? Optimize for what? There has to be a point to the optimization. So there's some obvious ones, right? Feel good. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. That's a realistic thing to optimize for. But to your point, it's relatively basic. Figure out what foods you do well with and things like that. Obviously, sleep quality is important. Obviously, don't drink alcohol. Or if you drink it, just know what you're getting yourself into. But then all these other optimizations, it's like you don't want to over optimize because optimize for what, right? And in work instances, there's some obvious reasons to optimize. Well, we did more in that day. Okay, that's cool objectively. But just once you get too much optimization crammed in, it's like, well, you also have to live your life.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
There's some good quote on that. It's like, don't optimize your way out of living your life.
That's a good one. That's a good one for me, to be honest. I see myself over optimizing a lot. That's really, I have to go back and listen to I haven't listened to Tim Ferriss in a little bit. It's funny you say that. He just popped up on my something yesterday. I thought the same thing. I'm like, I haven't listened to him in a while. And it was, it's so funny, Will. I actually remember he popped up on someone who I know is a big Whoop user. And I was looking at Tim like, oh yeah, I thought about this. I was like, Tim doesn't wear anything, doesn't have anything on his wrist. And I'm like, I wonder if he has gone like the other direction. So it's so funny you mentioned that. You've had a couple of those on this podcast today. But it's also funny. I would tell you, this is becoming like north of 99%, 99 point whatever percent of founders I've had on this podcast either don't have a process or have just a pen and paper to-do list. Like you'd be shocked. And it's funny at scale, like 200 plus founders have been on here, how little people use all of like the apps and things that make things more complicated. So honestly, like right back to what you just said is there's probably some truth to just simplicity across the board, even for someone like you who's trying to build $100 million business.
Do less things at bigger scale. Yeah.
I love it, man. Well, thank you so much, Will. I know we're a little over time, so I want to be conscious of your time. Where can people find IQBAR? Where's the best place to follow your journey and follow the brand?
Sure. IQBAR.com, IQBAR.com. And we're on Amazon. We're in Costco, Walmart, Sprouts, Sam's Club, BJ's. We're in over 10,000 locations, but you can find us on our store locator online. What else? You can follow me on LinkedIn, Will Nitze. Put out daily harebrained musings. Yeah, I think that's it.
I love it. I'll add all those links to the show notes. So everyone listening, go check out the show notes and you'll find all those links. Will, thank you so much, man. This was a pleasure. It was really nice to meet you and loved hearing your story. This is a really cool one.
Thank you.